Hello, welcome to another episode of Biblio Files, the show on AADL TV from the Ann Arbor District Library in Michigan, where we take a few moments each week to discuss one new book topic. My name is Amanda, and with me, as always, is Christopher and Lucy. And this week, we went with one specific award, and we were to pick any book from that award list to read independently, and then here we are to discuss and present those titles today. And the award we are choosing to discuss is the Stowe Prize. Now, the Stow Prize recognizes a distinguished book of general adult fiction or nonfiction that illuminates a critical social justice issue in contemporary society in the United States. The book must be written by a U.S. author and had been published in the United States during the previous 3 calendar years. The book applies informed inquiry, is accessible and engaging to a general audience, and promotes empathy and understanding. Because Stowe's writings challenged slavery and promoted women's education, social issues impacted by racism and gender discrimination are prioritized. In making this award, the Stowe Center recognizes the value of diversity to strengthen our communities. So that is what the Stowe Prize is. And I think 2011 was the first year it was presented. Is that correct?
Maybe.
I think so, yeah.
And there isn't a new book chosen each year. So what we did was each of us chose a title, and then we are going to discuss them today. And we don't know what the other people have picked yet. So Christopher, what did you pick?
Well, I chose the 2020 Stowe Center Prize winner, which is Solitary by Albert Woodfox. This is the story of Woodfox's 40-some years in prison. Most of it spent in Angola prison in Louisiana under solitary confinement. So Woodfox was originally convicted of armed robbery, and that's how he found himself in prison. But at some point, he became very politically aware and aligned himself with the Black Panther movement. And that is probably what led to prison authorities blaming him and convicting him of the murder of a prison guard. The story is full of information, not just information, but it very clearly conveys what jail life is like. Of course, I didn't want to read this book because I really didn't want to know what prison life was like. I didn't want to be in prison, but I thought that people owe Woodfox this, that they read his book and find out what his life was like. You really get a sense of the justice system, what it's like to go through court. In one paragraph, he goes through 6 years of his life. 6 years of his life pass in just the span of one paragraph while he's waiting for yet another retrial. And the wheels of justice turn so slowly. It's amazing. You also get a sense of how corrupt things can be. Besides justice, things are just overtly corrupt. When he's arrested at one point, the police clean the books on him. That is, they take all their unsolved cases and blame them on someone that they've just arrested. And it's a way for the police to look like they have solved more crimes than they have. Finally, you get a sense of how you're subject to the whims of the warden, and you go ahead and complain. What's going to change for you? You know, you're in solitary confinement. Good luck. You're really just set into prison and forgotten about. Finally, he does get out, and, you know, he remains positive throughout the whole book. I don't know if I would be that strong to take the stand that he did and still be looking forward to what he can do with the rest of his life. So it's a great book, and it was a surprisingly fast read. So that's what I read, Solitary by Albert Woodfox. Lucy, what did you read?
So I actually just finished Solitary by Albert Woodfox, and as you said, it's over 400 pages, but it's a quick read in that I found it impossible to put down. It's so full of details of Albert Woodfox's experience for 44 years, most of which was in solitary confinement. There are some other things I can add, Christopher, just to make it different. But one thing that struck me right from the beginning of this book was how Angola and the carceral system in the US basically is a legacy of slavery. Angola prison, where Woodfox spends most of his time, was at one point a slave plantation, and then it became a farm that used the convict leasing program and turned into a prison where there were still fields of cotton and sugarcane that were worked pretty much exclusively by the Black prisoners. So when you see the direct line from that to today, it's a pretty interesting point. And that racism is also a deep part, I think, of all the miscarriages of justice. I mean, there's a district attorney in this book who just refuses to let anything slide, despite all of the evidence to the contrary. There's no evidence against Woodfox and the two other men who are convicted with him. They were called the Angola Three. And another thing that I thought was amazing was that a lot of the legal happenings in this book occur because Woodfox himself learned every single detail of the legal system. And he sort of decided right when he got put into solitary that, like, here's this 6 by 9 foot cell, and I can either look inward and, be in a cell, or I can start to look outward. And so basically what he described it as, he created a university in his cell, and he learned everything he could about the law. He taught the other prisoners around him what he was learning. Using the 10 points of the Black Panthers, he sort of brought all the prisoners on his tier together to teach them that working in numbers would be more effective to get changes. And they did start to get changes because of his relentlessness and his just standing up in a nonviolent way against the violence that was put against him. And you sort of realize how powerful that can be, that if someone's going to continue to perpetrate violence, but you just are like, I'm not stopping what I'm doing, these changes do start to occur. I watched an interview with him where he was saying, we defined the cell, we didn't let the cell define us. And I think one way he described that he got through this is by really learning to turn off his emotions. It's so sad. He's interviewed by someone, and he talks about he's interviewed by a psychologist. They're asking him about the damage that solitary confinement can do. And he says, well, he can't really talk about that, because if he talks about how it would feel emotionally, if he let it, he wouldn't be able to survive it. So he has to just build up these layers and layers and layers of not letting himself be pulled into insanity and not letting himself lose hope. So he is an amazing man, and this is an amazing story. And like you said, Christopher, to learn about the corruption from in every pocket of the legal justice system is just so eye-opening. And it's interesting to learn that after 15 days in solitary confinement, the prisoners will start to feel psychological effects like hallucinations and depression. He was there for over 4 decades, so 23 hours a day in a 6 by 9 foot cell. But as hard as it is to read that, I would urge everyone to read this book. It's like taking the New Jim Crow that Michelle Alexander wrote and Just Mercy by Brian Stevenson, and it's kind of this distillation of those books, because you see one man's experience from the inside. And so he is still working for justice, and he's still an activist. And that's really all I can add. I mean, I could add a lot more, but that is all I will add in this little discussion of Solitary by Albert Woodfox. But I would just say, read it, just read it. So
I actually almost chose that book for this discussion. I had it checked out, the physical book to read, and I decided I wanted to listen to something on audio. So I started reading another book that I stopped, and then I found one that I wanted to listen to, and I finished it. So the book that I chose to do for this episode is Just Mercy by Brian Stevenson. So it's a good parallel. Because both books that we're talking about today talk about the faults in the justice system and what people do to do better. So Just Mercy was the 2017 selection for the Stowe Prize, and it focuses on Brian Stevenson. And he actually read the audiobook, which I really liked. So he did the audiobook, and as a young lawyer, he founded the Equal Justice Initiative in Montgomery, Alabama, which is a human rights organization that works towards creating fairness in the criminal justice system. And they've done a lot of work over the years as far as unfair sentencing, abuse of the incarcerated and mentally ill, a lot of focus on exonerating wrongly accused death row prisoners. And then there was a landmark in 2012 where their efforts helped towards the banning of mandatory life imprisonment without parole for all children under 17, which is an amazing thing that happened. The book focuses on, Brian discusses many of the people that he and his group have helped over decades. One of the main focuses is on a man named Walter McMillan, who was sentenced to death row for the murder of a white woman, which he did not kill. So he spends 6 years on death row, and then he is set free, and him and Brian form this relationship, and they stayed friends for 20 years. They call themselves brothers because they got that close. So the book has information about the legal system and what is happening across the country and in Alabama, just the injustices that are happening and the terrible things that are happening within the prison system. And it focuses on, it talks about these different people and that he helps. So you get examples of a woman who was in prison for saying that she murdered her stillborn child when she didn't. You have examples of kids who are in prison, and then you have Walter, and you get Walter's case throughout from the very beginning towards like Walter when he eventually dies at the end of the book. So you get plenty of examples of all of these wrongdoings that are happening, but there's also it's hugely inspirational. And Brian Stevenson and what just having all of that information and that heart and how much it took out of you. Like I listened to it and I finished listening to it this morning, and you're listening to it and you're angry and you're sad, but you hear these stories, and these are people, these are all real people who are going through this. And you mentioned the 6x9 cell at the end of this book I just finished reading, and where they're talking about a person who is in solitary confinement, and it's 5x7. So just imagining spending like years in this tiny little box. And I can't believe you said 15 days, you start to feel the psychological effects of it. Mm-hmm. It's amazing. So I highly recommend the book. It was a great listen. I was taken away with it. It just is a wonderful read. It's not the type of topic that it's like, oh, I don't want to read that. I want to read that. It's not, you like Christopher said, you don't really want to read about it, but you need to read about it because this exists. This is happening. This is still happening. The prison industrial complex, what is happening to people across the country. So it was a really fantastic read. Did either of you happen to read that one?
I have read that book, and I read it, I think when it came out, and it was so eye-opening, but also, as you're saying, inspirational. I mean, Brian Stevenson, you're like, who is this person? Yeah. And he's gone on to create this museum that is it's a monument to slavery, essentially, which we don't have, and we haven't had in this country. And the equal justice system still continues to be such an amazing organization.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and they're still doing work to this day. They've got reentry programs, education programs. They have a wonderful team that helps folks. It's a great book. I highly recommend it. It was made into a movie several years. I actually saw the movie several years ago, and I feel like the movie focused more on Walter's case and the story of that. So that was my introduction to Brian Stevenson, was through that movie. But I saw that movie several years ago. But I recommend the book. Forget the movie. Watch the book. Read the book.
Yeah.
The book was better than the movie because the book is real life. And for me, I loved hearing the author's voice read and tell his story, and just this stoic, like just full of heart. And yeah.
I think it's amazing how much more of an impact reading one person's personal story has than just reading about statistics or about something very abstract. Woodfox's telling of this and all of the details that he brings out really will stay with you for a long, long time, as it should.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Any other final thoughts on today's books or the topic of the criminal justice system and all of its faults?
Well, I would also mention that I think the whole list of the prize winners for the Stowe Award, it's a list of books that are all worth reading. And so it's worth checking out that list for sure.
Yeah, Lucy, you've mentioned the Glaude book, haven't you, on the Biblio Files?
Yes, yeah, I loved that book. That's Eddie Glaude's book that he writes about James Baldwin, and he's a really great writer. So
yeah, it's on my list.
Yeah, I recommend that one. So, and also the New Jim Crow, which is on this list, is also one of those books that exposes so much of the truth of the prison industrial system in this country and its links to slavery. So
awesome. Well, thank you, Lucy. Yes, if you're interested to find out more of the books that are on the list, please search for the Stow Prize or the Stowe Award. You'll get the list of it and you get information about the Stowe Center. We want to thank you so much for joining us today for this episode discussing those Stowe Prize winners. And if you are interested in sharing your thoughts on these books, or if you've read any of them or have thoughts about the Stowe Prize, please drop your comments via the link below. We would love to hear what you're reading, and just this conversation needs to keep going. So thank you so much for joining us today, and we'll see you next time.